Hey, welcome everyone. Simon Rosenberg, Hopium Chronicles, back with another great event. This one is timely and more newsy than many of our discussions, but joining me today is my dear friend Leon Krauze, Mexican-American award-winning journalist, former Univision anchor, writer for the Washington Post, and just so many things, and soccer fanatic, right, and among other things. Welcome, Leon. I'm really glad you're here.
Hi, Simon. Pleasure to be with you always.
So I asked you to come on today because we have breaking news today that the Nobel Committee has awarded its Peace Prize to a pro-democracy activist in Venezuela, who I'm going to try now to pronounce her name correctly, María Corina Machado.
Perfect.
And I asked you to come on because I know that you interviewed her not so long ago. And you can also give us some perspective on what you think this means, not just for Venezuela, but for the Americas, including the United States, in this battle for democracy. I would just like to read, before I turn it to you, I want to just read two statements that came out of the Nobel Committee today. One was that she won this award for her tireless work promoting democratic rights for the people of Venezuela, and for her struggle to achieve a just and peaceful transition from dictatorship to democracy. Mrs. Machado is receiving the Nobel Peace Prize first and foremost for her efforts to advance democracy in Venezuela, but democracy is also in retreat internationally. Democracy, understood as the right to freely express one's opinion, to cast one's vote, and to be represented in elective government, is the foundation of peace, both within countries and between countries. And then the head of the Nobel Committee, the chairman, Watney Friedness, I think is how you say his name. In the past year, Ms. Machado has been forced to live in hiding. Despite serious threats against her life, she's remained in the country, a choice that has inspired millions. When authoritarians seize power, it is crucial to recognize courageous defenders of freedom who rise and resist. Powerful words. What do you think, Leon?
It gave me goosebumps the first time I read it, and it happened again listening to you, Simon. This is an inspired choice. It's not always an inspired choice when it comes to the Nobel Committee. Then we could talk about other Peace Prize honorees, and we could even go into literature. We don't have time for that, but they don't always get it right, Simon. They really got it right this time. This woman is a force of nature, an inspiration to millions of Venezuelans and millions across the globe, among which I count myself. She has been fighting for Venezuelan democracy and against dictatorship and against the authoritarian, repressive Chavez-Maduro regime for decades. She is incredibly brave and courageous. Indeed, she lives in hiding in the country. She has refused to leave Venezuela, like 7.5 million people have been forced to do in this country that once was one of the richest on earth and is now in shambles after a quarter century of dictatorship. First with Hugo Chavez and then Nicolás Maduro. María Corina is one of the great advocates for liberal democracy in the world, and I couldn't be happier, frankly, for her movement, for Venezuelan opposition, and for the potential future of that country and the region.
Talk a little bit about, for those Americans who are not as schooled and aware of the history of the sort of despotic left in Latin America, where we have Cuba and Nicaragua, right? I mean, this is not just about Venezuela. This is about something much bigger, and the struggle for the people of Latin America to find, and South and Central America, to find a better path. And so, can you just reflect a little bit, take a step back from Venezuela and just about this battle for democracy in the region and what you think it means?
It's I would say it's been one of the most pernicious diseases in modern Latin American history, the appeal of the radical, and this left is radical, the radical authoritarian populist left that gets its inspiration from that failed experiment that has been the Cuban Revolution. And of course, I think I'm being cautious with the way I describe it. You can't understand Venezuela or Nicaragua or what for a period was happening in Ecuador as well, and of course for a long time happened in Bolivia, and frankly has been happening in Mexico as well in the last few years without Cuba. And you can't understand the modern Latin American left, and by modern I mean contemporary, not modern ideologically, without Venezuela. Hugo Chavez came to power a quarter century ago, and the country was immensely rich. He had access to the largest oil reserves in the hemisphere, basically, in Latin America, and he used that money to consolidate power, to prop up the Cuban regime. I think it's fair to say that thanks to Chavez and Maduro, the dictatorship in Havana has been able to, drag itself into the 21st century. And what we're seeing now in Venezuela, and what we've been seeing for a few years now, is the dismantling of a country, the complete erosion of democratic institutions, and the diaspora, right? 7.5 million people have been leaving Venezuela because life there is just basically impossible, economically, culturally, socially. There's no freedom, there's no liberty, and that's where María Corina and her movement come in, right? And her struggle and her movement struggle is incredibly inspiring.
Part of what struck me this morning, Leon, is that, and I gave a talk to my community last night, and I talked about at the end about what inspires me to keep going every day in the face of Trump's ugliness and his escalating authoritarianism here in the U.S. And I said, when I get down, I think of Zelensky and I think of Ukraine, and I think about the people of Ukraine and the courage and the bravery they've shown, and how if they can get up every day and put one foot in front of another when conditions are far worse there than they are here, then I can do it too. I mean, if they and I just thought, when I read this morning, I thought about her, I thought about Zelensky, I thought about the emerging pro-democracy sensibility and movement here in the United States, which is still very nascent and very immature, right, in this moment, unfortunately. But I think it's sort of gotten more muscular and taken important steps forward in recent months. And I think about the other people around the world fighting for freedom and democracy, and the Europeans holding the line against Putin. And you can imagine there's starting to be some kind of liberal awakening here, right? That becomes an important part of our journey here in the U.S. The center left, the center right, the pro-democracy forces, whatever of the old ideological orientations we had. And I think that, I really had more of a feeling about that this morning than I've had perhaps in a long time, because we can see a through line on this, right? There is, and it's important also for our listeners to realize, and I'll turn it to you, Leon, is that the other sort of factor in what's happened in Venezuela, like in Cuba, is that their biggest backer is Vladimir Putin in Russia, just in the way that Vladimir Putin is the biggest backer of Iran, who backed Hamas and Hezbollah, who then attacked Israel 2 years ago, and that this kind of axis of authoritarianism, of China and Russia, and with Russia's propping up, these authoritarian regimes that are causing so much trouble around the world. This also becomes part of the story of Ukraine as well, right? I mean, there's this sort of through line where there are these authoritarian powers trying to snuff out democracy wherever they can and back each other up. And so this becomes, the very first person today to criticize this decision, of course, was Vladimir Putin, right? Not a
Of
big
course.
surprise, right? Not a big surprise. So can you just, I just, given your Letras Libres and your work in Latin America, your family's long mission towards liberalism and greater openness and transparency. I mean, I don't know. I just felt like a glimmer of hope this morning when I got up.
I don't blame you. I share it with you, but I think there's I don't think the word is caveat or warning, but let me go back to something that María Corina Machado told me. I interviewed her at length for Letras Libres just a few weeks after the Venezuelan opposition had won the presidential election and had been subjected to the most massive, outrageous fraud, I think, in Latin American history. Because, I mean, part of what makes María Corina and her movement incredible is that she managed to document the results of every polling place in the country, Simon. So she had the receipts, and she showed them to the world and proved how big a fraud this election was. Maduro didn't care, and he's still in power. I interviewed her a couple of weeks after that. She described the situation as complete terror because, of course, the Maduro regime not only did not accept or acknowledge its defeat, but cracked down on opposition in a brutal way. And I asked her by the end of this conversation, how do you want to be remembered? And two things stuck in my mind, and I listened to it again today, and I was still struck by how emotional I got by listening to her. First of all, she said, well, I want to be remembered as a person who helped unite her country. She said, I want to, first of all, beg for forgiveness from my kids, of my kids, my three kids, because, sometimes I have this guilt of not being there for them throughout this fight, which I found incredibly touching. And then she said, I think Hugo Chavez will be remembered as the darkest period in Venezuelan history, but also, she said, as a lesson on human dignity and how fragile freedom and democracy really are, right? And she explained to me how how Chavez killed complacency over time. And by complacency, I mean how many people just took freedom for granted in Venezuela, democracy for granted, the fact that you could have a Christmas dinner or celebrate the holidays with all your family, when most Venezuelan families, and if not most, many Venezuelan families are now broken. Some in Chile, some in Venezuela, some trying to make it in the United States, because this authoritarian regime just killed freedom, killed democracy, killed the possibility of having a life. So I think that, of course, I agree with you regarding, this not glimmer, this shining light of hope, but also I think we have to be very awake at and for the moment. Venezuelans woke up one day and their country was gone. Because the media didn't take Chavez seriously, because Chavez eroded freedoms through symbolic steps and then through crackdowns, and then all of a sudden there was no country. And 10 years later, 15 years later, 7.5 million people were gone and families were broken. So I worry about our complacency in the United States, frankly, how we. Not you or your community, obviously, you've been awake for this and at this forever. But I hope that the rest of society realizes that it is happening here. There are signs that it is happening here. And complacency has and should have no place in our daily lives. Venezuelans offer a lesson.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but I want to talk for a second just about Trump and Venezuela. Trump, I want you to help us make sense of it all, right? So number one is that Trump is now trying to send back millions and millions of Venezuelans who are here in the United States, who came here legally. He's trying to send them back to a country they can't go back to. Mm-hmm. This has become a titanic fight. Second is that he's now claiming that he's going to wage a war on the cartels and, in essence, the Maduro regime itself. It appears, right? We don't totally know. And yet today, when Vladimir Putin tweeted out his attack on the Nobel Committee and denigrated the Venezuelan opposition, Donald Trump retweeted that out or retruthed that out and praised Putin for denigrating the Venezuelan opposition, who one would imagine would actually be his partner in trying to free the country from the cartels and Maduro, right? So can you try to make sense of what you think is really what the U.S. is really doing right now in Venezuela, what our aspirations and goals are? I mean, I have a hard time figuring it out, and I wondered if you could take a shot at it. Leon?
Well, like in so many things, the ego of the man in the White House gets in the way, right? Obviously, Maria Corina Machado would be the dream candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize in the current struggle for democracy in the Americas. It's obvious. And I'm sure that if we could have Secretary Rubio here and talk to him privately, because publicly I don't know if he would acknowledge it, he would agree with what I'm just saying. And I think he wrote a letter endorsing Machado, right? Because it's obvious. This woman and her movement are allies for the United States in the fight for democracy in the Americas. They're crucial for the future in Venezuela. Once Maduro falls, and it will happen eventually, Maria Corina and her whole movement will be crucial in filling that void, that vacuum, which will be, by the way, Simon, very dangerous, right? So there's a long list of shameful statements and decisions and reactions from the White House in these past few months. This one today, this morning, people around Trump, and of course the president as well, but people around Trump, first circle of the White House, disparaging the decision. It's just unbelievable, and impossible to explain beyond the gigantic ego of the president that always gets in the way of so many things, right? Now, what is the United States doing in Venezuela? I can tell you that there are voices within the Venezuelan opposition that wish that the United States takes the next step and goes after Maduro and rids the country of this horrendous curse, right? But at the same time, there are many voices within Venezuela that keep insisting that, the correct path is not the military path. I don't know where Maria Corina Machado stands at the moment after seeing, the gigantic fraud and seeing Maduro still in power. But I suppose, Simon, and I get this from the interview we had and from listening to her over the years, she has always underlined the importance of democracy and the electoral process, and doing this at the ballot box, and having this sort of very dignified path towards reclaiming her country. From a different perspective, I have to say that I do understand the people within Venezuela who are just exhausted and heartbroken, and that just don't see any other way but to extricate this government militarily from power, this mafia state. I don't advocate that personally, Simon, obviously, in any situation, and given the history of the United States in Latin America, even less so. But I have to be honest, that I do understand the heartbreak after 25 years of the demolition of a country. I do understand it.
Yeah, and brother, I could talk to you for hours, and let me come back to something you said, and then we'll wrap up. And we're going to not talk about the Latino vote today or any of the domestic stuff. But I
think there's great news there, by the way. Let's do it again.
And I just published today, just as a note on that for you to come back. We've seen Trump's numbers with all voters, but with Latino voters come down very significantly, and young people, which is important because many Latinos are very young, and so there's often significantly overlap there. But there was a poll published this week, a credible, serious poll by the Public Policy School of the University of Houston in Texas, statewide, showing that if there was a revote of the 2024 election, which Trump won by 13 points in Texas, that he would only beat Kamala Harris by 4 points. And a lot of the collapse that has happened with young people and Hispanic voters in Texas. And what the poll concludes is that, first of all, and then they did head-to-heads with all the various Senate candidates in both parties, and they're all within a few points. And none of the Republicans are over 50 at this point, which is just kind of incredible, meaning that we could actually have competitive statewide races in Texas in this coming cycle because, to a great degree, the shift of Hispanic voters but then they go on to conclude that this power grab that the Republicans have made and this of the 5 congressional seats the maps were built upon the 2024 performance of the Republican Party. And that when you factor in these changes, that many of these seats either become out of reach for Republicans or are now competitive as opposed to being Republican seats. And so this is an example of something that could be very domestically significant in terms of the alienation, the attacks on Latino community, the attacks on healthcare, ACA, which Latinos disproportionately benefit from in the United States, the slowing economy, the rising inflation. And so we have seen, Leon, some evidence now that, this shift that's taking place in the Hispanic Latino community is real. And it isn't ephemeral, that it could be an actual structural change. It's an opportunity for Democrats, one that we have to seize. I mean, we can't count on it happening unless we execute against it. But perhaps reflect on what you've seen from, obviously you lived in Los Angeles for a long time. You're now in Miami. I mean, what are your reflections on all this?
Simon, I mean, there was before the 2024 election. I know you've thought about this, written about this, like very few people. There was this debate on Latino voters, right, and whether we were seeing a generational shift towards the Republican side, and some people insisted that was the case for 2 main reasons. First, Latino voters were fed up with permissive immigration policies. And the second reason was the economy. And so since Democrats had failed on both, we were going to see the emergence of new conservative Latino quasi-majority. I suggested to a couple of people on social media that once Trump showed his true colors on immigration, secure the border, all right, but then turned this country into a terror state for immigrants, Latinos would immediately begin reacting. Once the stories were told, and thank God that the media is telling the stories, but not only the media, Simon, social media, thank God for social media.
Yeah.
All over, we're seeing the stories of heartbreak, of families being fractured, of kids being zip-tied, of the abuse of power, of overreach of the new ICE recruits. And of course, I'm very happy that I think I was right. Because obviously, once the Latino community sees this injustice, this active injustice, this campaign of terror, you were going to see a reaction. Of course, there are people who are angry at Trump because of inflation, yes. But there's an attack on the Hispanic and Latino identity in this country. And I see it here in Miami as well, with Venezuelans and Cubans who were very enthusiastic and have been very enthusiastic and very hot on Trump for a while. They are terrified now. Venezuelans are actively angry and terrified. And Cubans, I mean, you probably read John Lee Anderson's very interesting piece in The New Yorker just recently. There is a realization that this administration has begun and led a campaign of terror, and that it's turning this country into, or trying to turn this country into, an authoritarian regime. I think that the spell has been broken, and I think it was tenuous to begin with, but the spell has been broken, and it has been broken for many reasons, beginning, in my understanding of things and of my community, with the horrors that we're seeing around immigration enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, Leon, you and I have been talking about these things for several decades, and I will say that the sort of triumphalism and the arrogance of Republicans after 2024 regarding the Latino community and their belief that somehow their control of Univision, their new control of Univision, and their control of the Spanish language media was going to insulate them from the backlash. And as you pointed out, that part of the reason that that strategy has not worked is that an enormous amount of what's being conveyed is being done through social media. And you know, those of us in the Anglo world are only seeing a fraction of what's probably being seen in Spanish language social media, and just families sending people stuff that, you know, that don't ever get to the point of breaking through on my social media feed. But even just what's breaking through on my social media feed is just unbelievable. And I think that, you know, we now see Trump is down on immigration in most polls by double digits now. He still retains a small majority on border security, but that's also eroded. And now when you start asking questions about troops on the streets and everything they're doing, he's now down 15, 20 points in most polling on the sort of the terror regime as you're describing. And they believed, I really believe that they believed that they could do this and not have the backlash. But they also thought, I think, that the country was going to rally behind them, behind these authoritarian tactics. I think that they really believed that they were going in to clean up these cities. I think they all had lived in the Fox News burning cities images for the last, 5 years, and they believed these places were, terrible places because many of them never visited these places, don't live in cities, and they live in other parts of the country. And that I think that Stephen Miller believed he was going to be hailed as a conquering hero. And when he sent in the ICE and the troops to go in, and there has been just an extraordinary civic reaction to this. And you've seen it in Portland, you saw it in Los Angeles, you're seeing it in Chicago now. The courts they can continue to lose in the courts, even though they did win one really important Supreme Court decision regarding racial profiling. And I think what's been affirming to me is to see the way that everyday people in these places where we're now seeing the direct conflict have really reacted. And you're also seeing it even in the agricultural community, where leading farm groups and farmers are defending their own people and their own communities, and people that have lived in this country for decades and are contributing, running businesses. This has been really, I think that they believe that somehow, despite all the years of polling on this, where we knew that mass deportation was going to be wildly unpopular. This has been wildly unpopular in polling for decades, that they believe that somehow this time that they had been given what Stephen Miller is saying is that we won the election. We have the mandate to do this. Now we're executing against the mandate that we were given by us winning the election. And the people that are now resisting are insurrectionists. And what's amazing to hear Miller say is to not acknowledge how much the country has turned on this, and that he's like, look, we're going to do it anyway, even though there's now this I think it took them a while to realize that there had been sort of a huge outcry and that people were turning against them. I think they believed that in LA they were going to have free reign, and so I agree with you. I'm babbling here a little bit, but I think that I think that the Democrats in Washington have been slow to recognize the significance in the public of what's happening. People are seeing people, not immigrants, not illegals, not Hispanics, but people being treated in ways they never imagined people would be treated in America, that our rights and liberties of anyone are being trampled, so ours could be trampled too. And Democrats, I think, have a big opportunity here to use all of this to defend our Constitution, to defend our fundamental rights and liberties, to defend dignity, as you pointed out, the term you used earlier. And we need to be, out there arm in arm with J.B. Pritzker and Gavin Newsom and the governor of Oregon and all the places that are under siege now in a far more aggressive manner, in my view, and to really turn this on them and to make it clear that we're the patriots and they're the betrayers of America. And I think there's a huge opening for us now in the coming weeks.
I couldn't agree more, obviously, as you know, and I love what you just said. Now, I think the feeling, and I don't have data to back this up, but I think the feeling um, that's beginning to develop in the country is that this is not American, right? This is not who we are, and I think that's a crucial narrative, Simon. It really is not who we are. These images of people who are not prepared, that they are wearing masks, whose eyes are completely, out of their orbit, pointing weapons, guns at American citizens. It's just not American, right? Um, to send a national guard from one state to the other is not American. So to reclaim what is America and American is absolutely crucial, Simon. And again, going back to Maria Corina Machado and the leaders of the opposition in other countries, for example, we could go to Poland and talk about this particular aspect. A crucial factor is to reclaim the flag, to reclaim what it means to be American. And in this country, I'm sure there are people who are thrilled by when they see these images of repression and people being thrown to the ground and manhandled like this, and the abuse and the tears. There's a percentage of people who are liking this, but I'm absolutely sure, and there's polling on this now,
Yeah.
that a vast majority of Americans, let alone Democrats, independents, see this on their screens, either on TV or on social media, and realize this is not who we are. And I think there's a very powerful message there. And it's not an artificial message. It's just very, very clear. The two very different interpretations of what this country was founded on and what this country should be and where this country should head to has never been more clear, I think.
I also want to acknowledge that dogs are very welcome at Hopium.
Thank you so much.
We are very pro dog here at Hopium, and in this new era. And but listen,
before you weren't, there was a previous era in which you were anti-dog.
I just want to make sure, since I have my my patron saint of, I can't get the camera here. Yeah, Tug.
Yes.
It's actually Tug's birthday today. He passed away a few months ago after he lived.
I remember that very well.
A glorious life, and today's Tug's birthday, so we have to light a candle for Tug. But let's close up, Leon, because I think that we've covered a lot, and I just want to let you sort of bring things back and to close out here. But I think that this fight that we're now in with Trump, with the fight that we all wanted to have, that we're now having, we have started on healthcare, and I think it was a great way to start because there was proximate damage going to be done to people, and so it made sense to sort of start there. But it needs to expand, and it needs to expand into challenging the tariffs, which are raising prices and alienating and hurting America's brand around the world and hurting our farmers. This is also a proximate threat. It's not a future threat. And then this threat of democracy and the abuse of power that we're seeing is also proximate now. It's not something in the future. We can't wait, right? This is here now. And even today, just if you look at the comments coming from, some memo went around last night or this morning, and Mike Johnson and other Republicans on television have been talking about the No Kings rallies being terrorist rallies, and saying the National Guard is going to need to be brought in to quell them because the terrorists are the terrorist wing of the Democratic Party. They're using, there's a new phrase they invented. And Timothy Snyder said the other day that, the language that Trump and Miller are using is, like out of Eastern Europe in the 1990s, and it's so trite and ridiculous, and he can't even believe how, that it's happening here, right?
I saw that,
yeah. So we are in it now, and I think it's taken a while because of American exceptionalism and because the belief that things like this couldn't happen here. That it took a while, I think, for our leaders to really sort of confront, to your point, eyes wide open, wakened to the threat. J.B. Pritzker, Gavin Newsom, the Texas Democrats, Chris Murphy, and others have done a phenomenal job in kind of ringing the bell and telling us we have to fight at a higher level. But I do think the Democratic Party in the next few weeks is going to be significantly tested about at another junction point about, do we have the fight and the grit to do what's necessary now and to defend the country and to fight for the America that you described, what I call the America, the four freedoms. And I think that because Trump is escalating, it's here now, right? They are out of control. He's ailing and addled and idiotic, and his ego has been bruised, and so he's using the troops and the military in extraordinary ways. And yes, 2 days ago, Pam Bondi said in their Antifa event, this ridiculous Antifa event they had with all these right-wing lunatics, that we're using the military in Venezuela, and now we're going to turn it on Antifa here in the United States. An invented terrorist threat, a thing that doesn't actually exist. I mean, it's so Trumpian, right? It's something that's imagined as opposed to real. And so, I mean, perhaps pull all this together for us to end here, Leon. I mean, we started with talking about this inspiring leader, a woman, by the way, which I also think has significance in all of this, who is fighting for democracy in a country that was rich and prosperous and democratic and successful, and now is ruined and broken. And the lesson for us becomes real, that if we don't fight, right, much could be lost. Much has been lost. Much more could be lost. And just close us out with final thoughts today.
Well, you made me think of something she told me, which is public knowledge, but she underlined it in my my interview with her after the election. The first thing Maduro did after losing and realizing that he had to maneuver his way around this defeat to stay in power was he labeled both Edmundo González, the actual candidate from the opposition, and María Corina Machado as terrorists, right? He used that word. So, you can see a common narrative and a common thread in the way things are handled in this, authoritarian axis that has been developing in the world, that is such a threat, where you can find Russia, where you can find Orban's Hungary, where you can certainly find Venezuela, where you can find Bukele's El Salvador, with another few ingredients coming in there. And we have to remain vigilant, because just like Vladimir Putin, cleared up for us in a very pristine fashion today, they don't consider the fight for democracy worthwhile of any recognition. On the contrary, it should be suppressed. And it did not surprise me that Donald Trump, not only because of his narcissism, but also because of his deep beliefs and his admiration for strongmen and for dictators, thanked Putin. Right? There is a commonality there that is unavoidable. And I think the priority for everyone, Simon, who believes in democracy, from journalism, from political activism, from formal political opposition, is to guarantee that we have free and fair elections, man. That is, for me, the crucial battle of the United States. That in 2026, there are free and fair elections. That in 2028, there are free and fair elections. And then there's going to be a bunch of battles to be fought to reclaim the power of the legislative branch and separation of powers in this country that's been so eroded. But the most important thing is to make sure that we still have a democracy. That, for me, is the main concern and the main priority. I know people that I love and respect deeply who question that now. I mean, who question whether or not polls even matter, because I don't know if we're going to have free and fair elections, and Congress will even count as a counterbalance, like it's written in the Constitution, and it works in every liberal democracy. I don't share their pessimism at all, but I do believe that should be our main focus. Let's keep our democracy free and fair.
Amen, brother. It's always great to talk to you. Thanks for dropping by today on such short notice.
My pleasure.
And you've got a Washington Post piece coming out today.
Yeah, today.
Which I'll make sure everybody gets to see in the Hopium world. And Thanks, my friend. We also have to. We're overdue for a catch up, just as brothers. And
no, absolutely.
I'll give you a call next week.
Okay. Sorry about my dogs. They were dropping off a couple of porta potties because my eldest son, senior in high school, is having his first party at home ever, or at least since he was 8 years old. So porta potty, Simon, and the dogs were angry, and I'm terrified. Wish me luck for tonight. The first party here at home in a long time. So.
I'm gonna wish you, having now had 3 kids make it through high school and get to college, I'm going to wish you a lot of luck tonight, Leon.
Please.
You and your
Fingers
amazing
crossed,
wife
man.
and your whole family. Fingers crossed. Okay, brother. I'll see you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Listen, if you enjoyed this, please like, share, subscribe, and whatever, however you're receiving this. Leon's a remarkable guy. In our write-ups, we'll give you ways of staying in touch with him and his work in both Spanish and English. And, what do we say at Hopium? We just have to keep our heads down and keep fighting. Thanks, everybody.